Welcome to another episode of the Right in the Head podcast. I'm your host, John Paul Sperling, and my guest this week is Frankie. I'm going to try and get your last name right. Campisano? Is that correct?
Right in one.
Nice. It's weird. I got to that moment just now and thought, I've never said this out loud before.
You know, it's funny. I say this all the time, but I have different sides of my family that pronounce it different ways. So I pretty much just take any version. If you get close, I take it.
Right. I like that. I'm blessed with Sperling. You can't really mispronounce Sperling. The biggest challenge for me with my name is just everyone adds an H to John and have to keep telling them. Also, people do now call me John Paul as if it's one word because that's who I am online. But actually, I've discovered that's a really good way of filtering out spam emails because if it's hi John Paul, like you've just scraped LinkedIn, you haven't even bothered to change the name. That's so funny. Anyway, derailing immediately within 30 seconds of this episode. So, Frankie, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited about this discussion that we're going to have. First of all, tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll talk about the question that you've posed.
Right on. Well, first, thank you for having me. I've really been enjoying the first few episodes of the podcast. And from what I've heard, there's some friends of mine who are going to be on future episodes that I'm looking forward to. Folks probably have already heard those. I am a writer, comedian, and filmmaker. I've grown up on the business side of the entertainment industry, so I've kind of got a unique purview of I've got the creative stuff, which is really where my heart is, and then I've got the kind of more corporate business side, which has been a great way to help further my journey on the creative side. It's kind of, servant of two masters, but ultimately all helping me build relationships, build a community, build a career in entertainment, which is the thing I'm most passionate about.
Yeah, and that's something I really respect about you is that perspective of, yes, the creative side, but also the business side. Coming from a business background myself, I think that I relate to you a lot on that. And that's partially why I'm excited to talk about this subject with you specifically today, is because I do think there's an element of business and certainly marketing in this subject matter. And now I'm just teasing the audience because I haven't even said what the subject matter is yet. So to put them out of their misery, what is it that we're discussing today? What was it that you came up with as a suggested subject?
So I wanted to talk about finding your voice as a screenwriter, which to me, it can happen at different stages. There's not a certain point in your development where you're going to say, okay, by X number of scripts or X number of years, I need to have found my voice. It's certainly a thing that even working filmmakers in the studio system are continuing to develop, hopefully. But having that kind of benchmark where you can look back and go, okay, this is a project where it feels like it's starting to live up to the way I see myself as a creative, or it's starting to feel like it is not just an amalgamation of my influences, but in fact, taking my influences, synthesizing that with then my own personal thumbprint. That is, I think, when people start to really pay attention more.
Mm-hmm. I think that, yeah, so what you've touched on there is there isn't a single point in time where you step back from a script and say, that's it, that's my voice. And angels sing, and there's a beam of light from the heavens. I wish that was true. I really do. But I think it's more like with every script that I've written, it's maybe 5% more me, and by necessity, 5% less formulaic, I suppose, is the right word. Not that there's anything wrong with structure and formula. I think that is very, very valuable at the beginning of a journey. And if you can get to that point where you're writing good scripts and people are giving you feedback, this is a good script, I think the goal in many ways is to hear feedback that it's a good script, it's just missing a little something. And that's when you know, I need to find what's me. I need to create something that's familiar, but with me in it. And yeah, I think, does that kind of resonate with you? Is that how you would describe the voice that we're all looking for?
Definitely. I think that, and I think it can go both ways too. You could write something that is 100% you, and then the feedback that you get from stakeholders or contests, managers, whoever, might be take it a little bit more in that accessible direction or a little bit more in a commercial direction. So it's always a balancing act. And I think to your earlier point, I'd say it's a lot more common that you finish a script and go, well, this isn't my voice. This is one that, I got to move on to the next thing and approach it from another angle. Or I'm glad I tried this genre or this structure and I'm happy with the results even, but maybe not passionate about the results. And that's where, okay, maybe that's not your voice as a creative.
I like that. I like that. More of the scripts that I've written, I've thought they're not my voice. I'm just processing that. I think I would word it slightly differently in that I think most of my scripts that I have written, when I read them, I think that's a solid script. It's not quite going to be the script that gets me noticed. So I don't think I phrase it as, oh, that's not my voice. I think of it as, that's a solid script, but it could have been written by any other screenwriter.
Sure, yeah.
And I guess I'm saying the same. It's probably semantics at this point.
I think so. It also certainly depends. Like sometimes folks will want to step outside their kind of favorite genre or the space where they've done the most work. Sometimes they then discover a whole other passion and a lane that they can develop their voice that they hadn't. Other times they try something and go, well, that was an experiment and I'm never gonna write a Western again. I kind of tried it and it didn't work.
Yeah, turns out the whole Western set in space thing's not my voice. Just not my voice. Especially the operatic scene. It just didn't work. Just didn't work. By the way, anyone listening, if you want to write that, please don't be discouraged. Go ahead. That could really work.
There are examples where it has worked, so if it's your voice, go for it.
A Western set in space with an operatic scene. Fifth Element.
Fifth Element. I was thinking of Firefly as another one.
Okay, look at that. We just named two just off the top of the head. Turns out this is a really powerful subgenre we've stumbled upon here.
And both of those are pretty different because of the voices of the creatives driving it. They have common DNA, but tonally they're pretty different.
Wow, I made a sarcastic comment and it opened up into a real discussion. This is why I love having you on the show, Frankie. This is great. Elevating my base level sarcasm. Hey folks, just quickly wanted to say that if you are enjoying this episode, I truly hope you are, please do subscribe to this channel. I will be putting out more episodes just like this one. In fact, once per week, every week from now on, or your money back. Every episode is geared towards helping you as a screenwriter as we go on this wonderful journey together. Okay, back to the chat. So, where do you think you are on your journey of finding your voice? Because I see you on LinkedIn primarily, and it seems like there's a script or two or three that are doing very well. Certainly with competitions, you seem fairly prolific with competitions. Is that because you have found your voice to a certain level, or do you think you're still in the process of developing it?
I would say I have found my voice to a certain level, in that one of the reasons I'm able to juggle as many projects is because I'm a generous collaborator. I like writing with my friends. I like bringing people on board. One, to help balance all of that workload. Two, to help steer me away from, maybe more navel gazing tendencies, or to bring influences that are not going to be my frame of reference. Just to counterbalance the way that you might in a writer's room or taking a script out to get feedback from folks. But I'm only able to do that with the confidence that I have because I kind of know what I'm bringing to the table. I know my tastes and my interests and what I think my voice is. And the flip side of that is if someone checks out my portfolio and they're going to see, a feature written with this person, a pilot written with someone else, a second pilot written with a third creative partner, they could read all of these different projects and kind of see that through line and see that the connective tissue is my voice. Because I'm the common thread of all of these different projects, it becomes a little bit easier to kind of read the tea leaves and go, okay, this is the specific sense of humor and stylistic choices and kind of big swings that Frankie likes to take in their projects. And I can see the evidence, even if it's with a totally different writer who might have different creative priorities.
Do you think that working with writing partners has expedited your journey to finding that voice, or were there steps that you took before you partnered with other people, or even in conjunction with that, that have accelerated that journey? Because I think you have developed a very clear voice fairly quickly. Do you think it was the writing partnerships or other things?
I think it was a little bit of both. And it's hard to kind of take it in isolation because it wasn't like there was a period where I said, okay, I'm going to stop writing solo and I'm going to start writing with folks. It's something I kind of do in tandem. I have projects that are just mine that I don't want anybody else to kind of have a hand in, and then projects where I'm like, I like this idea. I need someone else to come in and spin it and have something that I can't bring to it that's going to suddenly spark that fire for me, and I'm going to be passionate about it. I would say for me, a very pivotal moment in finding my own voice, going back to like finishing something and going, maybe this wasn't it, was when I was 16. I wrote a novel, and it was 120,000 words. It's an action adventure spy thriller. It's not funny at all. One reviewer called it a Shakespearean tragedy, which is probably accurate to what I was going for. It's kind of bleak, but it was coming from a place of, I didn't know what my voice was, but I knew what influences I was trying to draw on, which for that project, I was trying to write my version of a Christopher Nolan movie. I was 16. I loved Inception. I loved The Dark Knight. I wanted to create something that I kind of felt like I could drive to completion. And, the novel is the novel. It's not a script that then has to become a movie. But in going through that process, I kind of realized at the end, one, I really want to do comedy. Comedy is in my heart, and this bleak, heavy subject matter that I was 16. What did I know about world espionage? Nothing. So it was not the best piece of material. It wasn't true to the stuff I wanted to create. And through that process, I realized what I really wanted to do was have someone adapt that novel into a film and hire me to do the screenplay. So then I said, okay, form-wise, screenwriting is what I want to do. And then from there, I started to look at, well, what movies do I feel the most passionate about? And certainly, it wasn't like I said, okay, goodbye, Inception, I don't like this movie anymore. But that was a project that it's, a huge studio blockbuster. I was not going to be able to write or produce anything even to 1% of the scale. So I looked at the other stuff that I loved, which was comedy and especially television. And so I really got into pilots as kind of my first foray into screenwriting, because I could read a ton of them. I could see what they looked like on the screen. And perhaps most usefully, I could look at a pilot for a show that maybe ran for 5 seasons and see how the pilot was good enough to get sold, good enough to get produced, good enough to build an audience for this show. And there are absolutely, examples that don't fit this, but oftentimes the pilot is not the best episode of a given show. It's that first version of it. They're still figuring out the characters, maybe what the actors are going to bring to their specific performances hasn't been embedded into the script yet. There's that like cyclical kind of relationship when you're writing for the performers that you have. And so I was able to kind of watch a pilot, read a pilot, and then see how, by having just watched the show, how they then extrapolated, oh, we want to really develop this character, or here's this thing that is not present at all in the pilot that then becomes integral to what the show actually is. And that helped me in a lot of ways kind of like take the pressure off, knowing that a pilot is an entree to a whole series, and that there is room to grow both as a writer and as a viewer.
Yeah, absolutely. The pilot it's a huge step, and yet it is just the first of a very large number of steps, and it will grow, it will expand. And yeah, I can imagine that even that process for you was, again, helping you to find your voice, helping you to find what is you, your essence when it comes out. And what I've noticed with long-running TV shows, assuming they keep the same writers, is even though the show itself develops and evolves, I think the good shows, the ones in my opinion that are good, they do keep that essence running through the middle of it, and you can tell that it's written by the same people in the same voice. That's something that's very, very joyful for me to watch. And when I say joyful, I mean it because I'm typically watching comedy. So I'm sure it's the same for dramatic writers, trying to keep the tone, keep the voice consistent throughout.
And there are shows that deliberately kind of make a pivot at a later point in their run, and even times where the pivot has been like, oh, I loved the first version of this show, and the new version, whether that is, like, I'll use Barry as an example, kind of goes away from being a comedy into not just a drama but almost a thriller horror, which is a lane that personally resonated with me. I love both versions of that show, but it doesn't surprise me when I talk to people and they go, oh, I bailed as soon as the show changed genres. And I think that's a thing that you have to really consider. Like, it can be done. And sometimes there's that core audience that goes like, yes. And you're also going to lose the core audience that goes, I wanted the same thing.
That's really interesting, especially the Barry example. So I watched Barry. I think I watched it all the way through twice. Big fan of the show. And I don't know that I ever really thought of it as changing genre. So that's super interesting. They clearly did a very good job of smoothing out that transition, because I mean, I guess I did think that the most recent season 4, I think, was it? Was tonally less comedic and a bit darker. I don't know that I would have classified that as shifting genre as much as just concluding the story, which couldn't have had as much comedy. They had to tie up some loose ends, and obviously Barry had to get some kind of comeuppance. But that's interesting that you would say that it changed genre. And of course, it's probably true. It's just me watching it through a different filter, I guess.
It helps in the context of watching it as it aired that there was a big hiatus between the second and third seasons. So that's when it came back, and it was clear that they had an end game in mind and they were working towards that ending. And to your point, like, it is still funny all the way through. I think even in the final episode, there are moments that are laugh out loud funny. It is very much the core characters stop being vehicles for jokes, and we get a lot more moments where we'll see two random characters having a quick dialogue exchange. It's funny. Then Bill Hader comes running through. He's chasing someone or being chased, and then we're with him. And now we're in a scene that's not funny, but we still had that comedic scene to get us in there, because, to your point, like, at the core, it's a 22-minute show. People are primed for comedy.
Yeah. No, that's a good point too. The duration of the show kind of dictates that it must be at least comedic in some way. So I want to kind of circle back to finding your voice as a writer. We've gone on an exploration there of how you went about that, and I think we've touched on some things that would benefit the listeners, all 7 of them. I think what might be useful also is to kind of talk about why it's even important to find your voice. You hear it a lot. You need to find your voice as a writer, and even as an actor or a musician or anything creative. As a painter, you would find your voice. What is it about screenwriting and finding your voice? What is it about this craft that we do that makes finding your voice so important?
So I think it's kind of a multi-pronged kind of approach, and listeners who've heard previous episodes will be excited, because finding your voice helps you do a lot of these other things. I think finding your voice and having the confidence to know that you have found it, or are farther along on that journey of developing it, because it is going to be a constant journey. That's a great way to help combat imposter syndrome, for instance. You can have that confidence of, I know what I want to write, I know what I'm interested in creating, and I know that no one is going to have the exact same specific point of view and perspective. There might be another person who is a comedy writer with interests in horror, who grew up in the same town as me and has worked at the same companies as me and has written the same number of scripts. We have so much in common. But my specific voice cannot be replicated, or is hopefully not going to be one-to-one, even if we have everything else in common. And kind of having that core belief feeds into itself. It gives you the confidence to break past imposter syndrome. It gives you the confidence on the page to trust your own instincts, make creative choices that excite you as a writer. And then it also helps you when you're finishing stuff and you're taking it out into the world, whether that is going to a networking meeting, pitching yourself to reps or execs, or going on a podcast and talking about your writing. Just knowing the confidence of, I know my voice and I have a body of work that supports that thesis goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Agreed on everything. I would add to that mix, and I'm sure you will appreciate this coming from a business background. I put my marketing hat on and I think of it as a product. And if you're as a product, if you are the same as everything else, then it's playing safe. There's probably supply and demand. You'll probably sell because you're a product that everyone's familiar with, but you won't be an innovative product. You're not going to disrupt an industry. So I like to think of it that way. Doing what everybody else is doing, it feels safe and it's predictable. But to stand out, you do need to start pushing the envelope in different ways. And as a writer, that can come in different ways. It could be the way that you format your script. It could be the kind of jokes that you're daring to tell. It could be the characters that you're developing that no one else has seen before, or at least in this particular way. I think everything you're doing there is certainly trying to make your own work stand out. It's also about how would your representation pitch you as a writer. This is something that a good friend of mine who's a producer over at Bruckheimer, he recently said this to me, and it really woke me up, if you like, because I was talking to him about representation and what's been going on with my reps recently. And he asked me, if they were to pitch you as a writer to me as a producer, how would they pitch you? And I honestly said, I have no idea. I don't know. And he said, I think the next step in your journey is to have an answer to that question. Are you the next Ricky Gervais because you're from the UK and so everybody's the next Ricky Gervais? Are you more in the direction of Simon Pegg, Edgar Wright? Who would you compare yourself to? But then why are you also different from that? Why would anyone care? And that's really got me thinking. And this is a fortuitous timing for this episode, because this is the journey I'm on right now, is thinking, how would I brand myself as a writer? Am I similar to other writers? Yeah, okay. Now, how am I different to those writers? Do you ever think about it in those terms? Is that something you've spent a lot of time on?
Definitely. Like I was saying before, it all kind of feeds into each other. And I think at the heart of it is kind of knowing your voice as a writer. And then the next kind of evolution is, well, then what is your brand as a creative? Because they're hand in hand, but they're not exactly the same thing. My voice that might come across in a script or in a scene or in a project is not necessarily the 10-second elevator pitch I'm going to give someone at a networking event when they ask me, what do I do? I was at a networking event recently with a friend of mine who is a writer who mostly is coming from a poetry background, not really a screenwriter, but she's moving into that direction. And so we were going to this networking event, and I told her, hey, every person you meet is going to say, so what do you write? That's the first thing they're going to ask. And what they're actually asking is, tell me about your voice. If you go, oh, I write features, or, oh, I write half-hour pilots, they're going to go, okay. And then ask the question again in a slightly different way to get the answer that they're really asking. And so I kind of workshopped her response with her. I said, you're going to want to say, like, oh, I mostly, what you're working on right now is, in this case, was a feature that was kind of a romantic comedy with magical realism at the heart. And I said, that's a specific answer that when someone hears that, they're going to understand it. They're going to have a specific kind of inroad to your tastes as a writer, your voice as a writer. And then they're going to want to ask follow-up questions, where if you just go, oh yeah, I write comedy pilots, they're going to go like, okay. And it's like, they're going to, maybe if they're generous, they'll prod and ask questions and pull teeth a little more to get you there. But if you're at a networking event where there's 200 people, they might go, okay, I tried, and kind of move on to the
Yeah.
next person.
Yeah, I love that. It's the cocktail party. You're at a cocktail party and somebody asks, "What do you do?" And there's two versions of the answer you can give. And again, I'm going back to I learned this going through the journey of being an entrepreneur, right? So if somebody asks you what you do and you say, "I'm a chef," it's not really that interesting. There's not really anything that stands out. But if somebody asks you what you do and you frame it as a question, as a problem solution, so you could say, "Oh, you know how some people are too busy to eat healthy foods, but they've got a lot of money because they work a lot of hours? Well, I'm an at-home chef." That's so much more clear. Like, you've just told me exactly what you do, why you do it, your target audience, everything. And I always think about that, because if somebody asks me what do I do as a writer, I don't know that it still works in the problem solution format. Like, well, you know how some people are just looking for another dark comedy like Barry? I don't think you need to go that far. But I do think, to your point, there's an answer that gives them more than just "I'm a comedy writer for TV." Something that I've been thinking about since my friend posed this question to me is, without really doing this intentionally, a lot of my work has a message embedded in there that would be counted as some kind of personal development and growth message. And I think it just comes from my background in coaching. It's not intentional, but that's what comes out when I start writing. I think, how is this going to help the viewers, not just by making them laugh, but teaching them something, and definitely not like whacking them over the head with a moral message. I don't like it when shows and movies try to do that. But if there is a journey that somebody goes on and it's relatable and shares something that I believe to be true about how people should move through the world to be happy, that's a sweet spot for me. So I think my answer would be, I haven't got it into the elevator pitch yet, but it would be something along those lines. And now I'm just figuring out how to not make it sound trite, which is a challenge. What do you feel? I'm interested to get your feedback on that, actually. Do you think, you know me a bit, you've attended some of the free Zoom hangouts I do. Do you think I'm in the right direction with that answer?
Yeah, I think so. It's clear. It's the type of thing where, like, it's often in those situations, it's rare that someone is kind of being like, if I don't hear the right answer, this conversation's over. You know, it's really just having the answer, having clearly put some thought into it prior to the moment where someone asks you and they get the deer in the headlights look. That's enough that you can then start having that conversation. They might start asking, "Oh, tell me about a specific project," or they might often, I've heard this a lot, where people will kind of hear the types of things that you're interested in, and then they'll throw out an example to see, like, am I in the right ballpark? And so then if yes, then great. Now you have a commonality. You can start to talk about it and then segue into your work. If not, then it's an opportunity to go, well, it's kind of like that, but my work is a little more X, Y, and Z, and, you know, steer them back. But just the fact that they're taking a swing and trying to make sure that they've can wrap their head around the, you know, the rough version of what you're pitching, as far as your brand and your voice, as long as you're not just doing what I'm doing and trying to go extemporaneously and hitting a blank, you'll be fine.
Live podcasting, hey? I want to ask you this question because this book really, really opened my eyes to this. Have you read the book Kill the Dog?
No.
Okay. I'm sure you're familiar with its counterpart, Save the Cat.
Yeah.
Everybody's read Save the Cat. I like Save the Cat. I think it's a great way of looking at structure. The BS2 beats have helped me a lot. And then I saw a book called Kill the Dog, and I was so intrigued. I had to read it. And it honestly blew my mind. This is a book written, and I'm blanking on the name of the author. I'm very sorry about that. It's a book written by a currently working screenwriter, and he's very, very clear on that, because I think from his perspective, a lot of these books that are supposed to help screenwriters are written by people who are not working screenwriters.
Gurus. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Gurus who maybe couldn't sell a script, and so they wrote books about selling scripts instead. So this is a working screenwriter talking about how essentially following those books like Save the Cat, learning the structure, it's okay, but it's not going to get you anywhere because everybody else is doing it that way. And so you kind of need to throw the rules out and write whatever comes to you. And he gives some outrageous examples of scripts that he read that people have used different fonts, you know, breaking that Courier 12-point rule and using a whole page for a single word just to give it emphasis. And there's a whole bunch of examples in there. And as somebody that kind of came into this a few years ago and read all the books and studied the structure, I was horrified to hear that these scripts exist. And not only do they exist, they got writers noticed. They got them deals. They got them representation. It's a completely different look on screenwriting. So anybody that asks me how to start developing your voice, first thing I say, you need to read the book Kill the Dog. It really changed everything for me. And I'm going to go and reread it because having these recent conversations about finding my voice, I need to go and listen to it again because it pointed out so many things that I've since forgotten. So definitely one to go and reread.
I'm excited.
And highly recommended.
I'm excited to check it out. A book that I always recommend for new, emerging, even seasoned writers is a book called Screenwriting for Neurotics. And similar to you, I've read a ton of the books. I've read Save the Cat. I've read, Robert McKee. I've read all the ones that you are taught in school.
All the classics.
And they are helpful. I'd say less helpful than just reading, 100 scripts. But Screenwriting for Neurotics caught my eye. One, because of the title. I was like, oh, maybe this is exactly for me.
I was going to say, you had me at neurotic.
But the approach that the writer takes, he's I don't know if he's necessarily a working screenwriter, but he is a screenwriting professor. And so is working with students who are often writing their very first script. And that's an interesting space to be because I think that finding your voice certainly helps with imposter syndrome, but there's always going to be that little voice that's like, do I know anything about what I'm doing? Do I need to bring it back to the very baseline fundamentals? And Screenwriting for Neurotics really helps, at least for me. I found it to be a really demystifying process. As I said before, I mostly do pilots. I like doing shorts. I've done features, but they're mostly collaborative. And so as a consumer of media, I only watch features. I'm a movie buff. I love movies. And so I kind of was trying to thread the needle there of why haven't I been writing more solo features? And it's because I was scared. I was nervous of it's this bigger thing to take on. And it's a lot harder. Like I was saying about the pilots, where it just has to be the first version of it and it can grow and continue and it can evolve as the show goes on. The feature is the feature. It's a discrete unit of art. Mm-hmm. And so that
beginning, middle, end.
Mm-hmm. So that intimidated me. And Screenwriting for Neurotics really demystified that process because it's not really a book on structure. It's not saying on page 17, you need your inciting incident. It is saying to write a feature, you are literally going to make a series of creative decisions. This is one recommendation for the most efficient order to make those decisions and what elements you need to be considering as you're making those decisions. And certainly you're free to make your choices and do whatever you want, but the wisdom that he kind of relays is here's why certain choices are going to just make it harder for you as a writer. And the idea of his method is that he really front loads coming up with your story, coming up with your ideas, coming up with your structure, and then taking it step by step, scene by scene, so that when you're sitting down to actually do the act of writing, it's fun and you enjoy it. And you then breeze through the hard part of taking an idea and coming out the other side with a finished, if not, or I'll say a completed, if not finished draft. Because then you revise it.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to check that book out. Thank you for the recommendation. That sounds great. I want to kind of bring things home here. We have a few minutes left. And I always love to end episodes with kind of some practical takeaways. So I think we've touched on a lot of things here already that are practical. So things like reading these books that we've harped on about, and thinking about how you would brand yourself. Is there a way that you would describe yourself at a party that you're at, in a way that's not just writer or comedy writer or something similar? Another thing that I've done in the past is, this is some advice that was given to me a long time ago by somebody who was kind of a mentor to me. He said, pick any scene that you've written in any script and just go back to it and read it and think about where you're doing something because you've seen it done lots of times before. And the example that I ended up with, I had written a scene where, very classic rom-com moment, a guy and a girl lock eyes over, a crowded room, and then you cut to a scene where they are all over each other in the cloakroom. And the advice was, at the point where you realize you've done something that's a bit cliche, what would it look like to do the opposite? And so I went back and rewrote that scene, just the individual scene. The guy and the girl lock eyes over a crowded room, and then it cuts to her beating him over the head with a shoe. And it was just for fun. But I really loved the advice, because talk about finding your voice. How can you subvert what normally happens and just go a bit wild, go a bit crazy? Is there anything from your experience, like a kind of a drill like that you could share with the people listening?
One thing that I did that I found was very time consuming, but very rewarding, is I took a film that I loved, Lady Bird, and I found the script, and knowing that that's a script that it was a writer director. So Greta was directing from her own script. It didn't have to get translated by another creative. I then watched the film scene by scene. I read scene one, then watched scene one, read scene two, then watched scene two. That's a 90-minute movie. This exercise took me about 3.5 hours, but it changed my understanding of the film. And especially, I was able to see how quick those scenes are. My scenes, I thought they were short, in that my scenes were maybe a page on average. Lady Bird is sometimes fitting 4 or 5 scenes on a page because they are in and out. And the way that then comes together to make a short, or a feature that is relatively short, 90, it's a tight 90, but feels like it covers so much ground because it covers a whole year in this character's life, was extremely helpful for me in terms of looking at my own work and looking at places to cut. To go back to your conversation with Nick from a couple weeks ago, where he talks about editing your own work as a video editor, and then applying that kind of mindset. That same kind of thing really has helped me. Editing my own work, watching a finished edit of a film and looking back at the script. There are then elements where I'm like, oh, I can write in a J cut into this scene where the dialogue either extends into the next scene or is brought in early from the next scene, and kind of do those moves that you see in the finished product in the edit, but do it on the page. And then, even though that's structurally something people have seen before, they don't see it quite as often, and it begets a level of confidence in the writing that people are excited about. Like I did it in a pilot of mine where I had a character delivering a monologue over like a juxtaposed imagery, so that you think that what you're hearing is the scene you're looking at, and then reveal, no, it's not. You're actually hearing just something else in a different context. To me as a writer, it felt a little bit like a cheat. It felt like I was, you could see the writer puppeteering the strings. I didn't love that I did it. It felt like I was doing a move. But people go crazy for that scene. It is the scene that everyone points out to that they love in that script, and that it feels like a real show. And so that kind of told me, okay, sometimes there is that element of bringing in what people are, not necessarily what they're expecting, but what they're familiar with, and those kind of highway markers that kind of tell them this is a real show versus an amateur thing.
I love that. Yeah. Familiar. The same but different, I think, is something that I constantly bear in mind when I'm creating the idea. It's the same but different. If you're too
Yeah.
different, to your point right at the beginning of this conversation, if you're too different, it's scary. No one's going to touch it. And if you're too similar, why would they want this project? They've got that already. But if you're the same but different, I think that's a really happy, sweet spot. You brought to mind something that I've done, again, a practical drill, which is to sit down and write for a short period of time. I typically aim for 20 minutes, but completely uninterrupted. No stopping, no idea where it's going. Just write whatever comes to mind. I recently did this with the climactic scene of a procedural that I've been working on. I haven't written anything else for this show. There's no character breakdown. There's nothing. I started with the final climactic scene where they break down how the people did the crime that they did, and just blitzed it over 20 minutes. And of course, that's not how it's going to be, right? There's going to be so many rewrites of that scene, but it opened up so many ideas, so many character ideas, because you think, oh, what would be kind of quirky and funny right here would be if this character said this instead of what you think they're going to say. And what that does is then you think, well, reverse engineering, why would they say this slightly different version? Well, now you've just added some character backstory without even thinking about it. I found it to be extremely useful. I think I'm going to do more of that. Just sit down and set the timer, 20 minutes without even looking up from your screen, and just hammer the keys, write it like your fingers are on fire. Just see what comes out.
It's definitely a balancing act, because I've had scripts where I've put not so much a lot of time into the outline, but the outline kind of came to me fully formed. Like, not every script. Every once in a while, one just comes and I'm like, I see the totality of the first version of this idea. And so then when I sit down to write it, I have the outline and I have the passion for the idea, and I'm able to go, okay, I'm going to sit down, and whether it's 20 minutes or 2 hours, I'm going to get a completed draft of this pilot, because I know what all the scenes are. I know what the characters are. I know the first version of it. And then because I've got that roadmap and I've put the thought into the outline and I trust the outline, I then am free to do whatever I want on the page, because if I take a big swing or take a left turn, I still have the rest of it. It's not, okay, now I'm going to sit and think, well, what should happen next? I know what I want to happen next, and I'm going to worry about the finesse of it all later once I have something I can show someone.
Yeah. Yeah, the balancing act that you brought up there, that's very powerful. Yeah, there's a back and forth between between the two books we were talking about. I can imagine that as a pendulum swing between save the cat, kill the dog, save the cat, kill the dog.
Yeah.
Because without any structure, I think you're in danger of writing something that just isn't marketable. And then there's too much structure, which is, like we said before, it's just the same as everything else. So
Yeah.
I think you're right. It's definitely a balancing act there. This has been great, Frankie. Thank you so much for your wonderful question that you posed, and for all of your contributions here. You've given me a lot to think about, and hopefully that translates to the folks listening to this, giving them lots to think about also. Anything that you would like to link in the description, anything we can promote for you, anything where people can follow you, perhaps social media? I know that you are, as I said earlier, prolific on LinkedIn, but I'm sure you're elsewhere as well. Where can people go?
My personal website is frankiecampisano.com. You can also find it at classicamerican.cool, which I bought recently. That's also my Instagram handle is classicamericancool. I'm on Twitter at Frankie the Fourth. And then if you want to see what I'm doing with my creative collective, our website is nice-hog.com. We're on Instagram at nicehogstagram, at nicehogtweets on Twitter. We do live streams. We do sketch comedy. It's my group that we kind of produce our short films as a creative unit, not always wearing the same hats, but often just having those same frequent collaborators working on and championing each other's projects.
I love it. That's great. I will probably follow up with email to get all of those links from you, because that was a lot of links to remember. So I'll shoot you an email. We can do that the proper way. Thanks so much again, man. This has been great. I've really enjoyed this time. And episode part 2, I'm sure we'll have to do that at some point in the future, because I feel like we could have talked for another hour today.
Easily.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. I will say cheerio for now, but yeah, part two coming soon.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.